We're going to continue our look at Bob Dylan's official studio albums throughout the decades. Now, in previous episodes, we've looked at his output in the 1960s, the 1970s, and the 1980s. Now we're going to look at the 1990s, his fourth decade in music. So are you ready to see what Bob does in this decade, the 90s? Well then, let's drop the needle. Bob Dylan must have been preoccupied in the 1990s because unlike the 60s, the 70s, and 80s, where he was very prolific in his studio output, in the 90s we only find 4 studio albums. And the first one is Under the Red Sky, and it is universally panned. And Bob has actually admitted that he didn't spend much time on the album because he was very busy with the Traveling Wilburys. The song seemed lightweight, and it starts with a very silly wiggle wiggle, Under the Red Sky, then there's 10,000 Men, Handy Dandy, and Cats in the Well. Even the titles seem kind of weak. It's not one of Bob's finer moments. The album could only reach number 38. In 1991, Bob receives a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award, but he seems pretty withdrawn and distant during the event. In 1992, Bob picks up his acoustic guitar and decides to record an album of traditional folk songs. Now, Bob is the only musician on this record, and in fact, it is the only record not to have any Dylan compositions on it since that ill-fated Columbia Revenge release called Dylan back years ago. Tracks include Blackjack Davy, Sittin' on Top of the World, Hard Times, You're Gonna Quit Me, and Froggy Went A-Courtin'. The public did not really take to this album, and it stalled at number 51 on the charts. But if the record-buying public was trying to send Bob Dylan a message, he didn't get it, because he follows it up with a follow-up album, sort of a sequel of sorts, called World Gone Wrong. And again, Bob's the only musician on the album, and again, there are no Dylan compositions on it. Like the previous record, it's just folk songs. Delilah, Stack-a-Lee, Blood in My Eyes, and Lone Pilgrim. But this album sells even worse, and it stalls at number 70 in the US. After a break of about 3 years, in 1997, Bob decides to go into the studio and record some new original music. But the sessions are halted because he's feeling sick and is raced to the hospital where he has a life-threatening heart infection. After Bob recovers, he returns to the studio and records an album that he releases called Time Out of Mind. And boy, what a great album this is. It's considered one of Bob's best. Again, it's just Bob on the record. And in fact, the record did so well that he received a Grammy for the best album of the year for that record. I like Lovesick, Standing in the Doorway, 2 great songs, Trying to Get to Heaven and Not Dark Yet. And of course, the 16.5-minute song, Highlands. The decade ends with President Bill Clinton awarding Bob Dylan a Kennedy Center honor. Now, as usual, I've created a Spotify playlist. It contains songs that I've talked about on this episode. Here's the link, and I'll put it in the comments down below. As I said earlier, Bob only put out 4 albums in the 1990s. He started the decade pretty disappointedly. Now, he did have success with the second, which was called Wilbury's third album, but he did have success with them. But as far as his own albums, the first one was really not well received. Then he had 2 which were even worse received. Then he had a very dry period, but boy, did he resurrect himself with Time Out of Mind at the end of the decade. So that's Bob in the 1990s, his studio albums, and that wraps up what is 4 decades of him creating studio records. But he's not done yet. In a future episode, we'll look at what he does in the 5th decade of his studio record output, which will start with the year 2000. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep it rockin'. If you liked this episode, hit the like button, and you can also leave me a comment down below, and I'll respond to you.
If you subscribe, we'll let you know when future episodes come out.